Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on the time of day for you, and welcome to this special edition of Lessons from the Lockdown. My guest this morning is Andy Searle, CEO of BPeSA South Africa, our national body for contact centers, BPO, and global business services. Welcome, Andy.
Good morning, Rod. Thanks very much.
Great stuff. Just to kick straight into it, if you could please just give us a view of BPeSA's role pre-COVID-19. In other words, we're looking more towards the end of last year and the strategic intent moving forward into 2020. What was BPeSA's vision moving into 2020?
Well, BPeSA in 2019 had set out a 5-year growth strategy with its partners in Arambia and the DTI. And it was quite an ambitious one. It really initially started off in the early 2019 period being a targeted 50,000 net new jobs in the sector. This is all offshore jobs. But we saw with the sustained growth rates we were experiencing that we had a much better trajectory than that. And we increased that to 100,000 by the end of 2023. And all our efforts and all our energy was focused on achieving those goals. So those would be our internal goals. Obviously, to enable achieving that, we had to put a lot in place from a marketing perspective, a skills perspective, mobilizing the industry in South Africa, and really firming up our partnerships and channels. So most of 29 for us was centered on gearing up for that growth and also really leveraging the momentum and the growing credibility in the global market, although notwithstanding there was a lot of work to be done. But you'll recall the end of 2019, we had a wonderful conference down in Durban. And the conference really, for us, reinforced for ourselves more than anybody else, the strength of our proposition. Relative to the other offshore destinations that we would typically compete with. So it was looking good. We spent a lot of time in late 2019 and the early part of 2020 also expanding the scope of representation to include the ICT sector, especially ITO, where we have immense talent in South Africa, companies that are doing fantastic work offshore, from software development, technical support. There's a lot of innovation going on. And a considerable amount of effort was spent starting to engage those role players through our partners in what we call the Public-Private Growth Initiative in the ICT sector, to start working more and more together in our offshore market strategy and in our efforts to address skills, because many of the skills demands were so common to us. So we were in a good space. We were on a good growth trajectory. We were starting to get a better positioning out in the global markets. People were understanding more about what South Africa really has to offer and why it differentiates itself from many of the other offshore destinations. We were seeing a lot of traction, new business coming in from all the target source markets, which was great to see, and growing pipelines in our membership base and non-member base. So, yeah.
Point, if I can cut in here, my observation, and I think you've alluded to it, a lot of BPeSA's strength, particularly in the latter part of the last 2 years and moving into the future, has been in the relationships and the partnerships that BPeSA has forged with the private sector and with government. Maybe if you could just expand on that, because I think it's quite an important lesson to other industry bodies elsewhere in the world, is the success, in my opinion, or my observation, lies in those relationships. I'd be interested.
Absolutely agree with you.
Expand on that.
Yeah, Rod, it's the one thing we've learned in South Africa, and that's the importance of collaboration. And it's really been about making sure that the right role players who bring different strengths to the table, but have a common interest in what we're trying to achieve, can really engage each other in a structured way, in a way in which they can each really make meaningful contributions, and in a cohesive way where we can always be on the same page and working absolutely in sync with each other. South Africa has been quite unique in that we've had the support and active involvement of a strategic partner. Many of your audience will know the name, and that's Harambee Youth Employment Accelerator. And they have been tremendous in facilitating BPeSA's access to other industries, to other collaborative platforms like the Public-Private Growth Initiative, engagements with government through initiatives like the Job Summit, and cementing our relationship with our key government partners, and that's the Department of Trade, Industry and Competition, but also introducing us to other key role players in government like the Department of Education, Higher Education and Training, Department of Employment and Labour. All have a vested interest in what we do and have a lot of value to add and to contribute. So we've worked hard at those partnerships, and that's all the partners have worked hard at that. And I think we're now seeing the fruits of that. The DTI have been a long-standing supporter of the sector going back many, many years. They've invested heavily and supported the sector with really competitive incentives, with a lot of support around policy change, with investment on the skills side. But it's this bringing together of all of these role players around a common goal, and aligning, if I may say, even in terms of our business culture, collectively, our sector culture, that's really starting to bear fruit. So when we go into the offshore markets, we go with one voice. When we lobby and engage in our domestic market to deal with some of our enablers for growth and obstacles to growth, we speak with one voice, and we're able to reach a much broader audience. So I think partnerships in the development and growth of sectors like ours are really, really key to broad-based inclusion and to unblocking obstacles and to unlocking real growth opportunities at scale. You need all of those role players.
Talking about inclusion, it's been my observation, and once again, your views on that, particularly when I attended the BPeSA conference in Durban last year. It appears to me that BPeSA has moved from a focus on BPO, GBS, foreign inward investment, into supporting the greater industry, whether it is captive operations or not. That was my observation. Is that part of the strategic move or maturing of BPeSA to be all-inclusive?
It is, right? And the reason for that is, South Africa has a wealth of talent that's diversified across regions. It's diversified up and down the value chain. And in fact, some of the fastest growing businesses in this sector in South Africa are homegrown businesses. And their supply chains around them are growing significantly and quickly too. And therein lies our strength, because with that growing base of capability in South Africa that we are accessing and bringing into this opportunity, we can offer countries more than 6 quality destinations in the country in which they can set up multiple sites and experience the same quality of service provision. So yes, of course, it's the large global BPOs, the large end users and captive operators who we'd love to attract to set up shop in South Africa. But very important to us is this inclusive growth across the country. And, we've got small companies that have grown rapidly from inception to 600, 800 seats in the space of 2 years, 3 years. And it tells you something about, one, the entrepreneurial capability in South Africa that we absolutely have to tap into and unlock, and also around the breadth of capability in the country. And these companies also represent great partners to investors and offshore operators who, moving into any new territory, look for partners with local domain networks and resources to help accelerate their mobilization. And we've got a growing group of fantastic South African companies that make tremendous partners for large international BPOs. That I think is something that is key to our growth strategy.
Excellent. Now we move into February, March, COVID-19 impact on the industry, when the tsunami finally hit us and hit our industry. I wonder if you could just talk us through the impact of that in the initial stages, and then more specifically the role that BPeSA has and continues to play in facilitating the continued existence, if you like, of the industry or the sector. So it's a long story, but if we can, like, take the highlights of the last few months or 6 weeks.
The first thing that happened, Rod, was in mid-March, when we had a clear sight of what was coming, we quickly refocused ourselves away from that growth path that we were on, and the intensive plan of initiatives for the 2020 year. And we put all our effort into preparing for, how the sector can continue to function and play a meaningful role in combating COVID-19 in South Africa and supporting our partners in other countries where they were facing exactly the same threat, or they were in the midst of it at that stage. So BPeSA was probably in a really strong position, thanks to the partnerships, the structures, the level of engagement that we had to move quickly as an industry, to use the relationships that we had to lobby with our partners in business, across, and jointly with other sectors of the economy, and directly with our partners in government to secure the permission for the sector to continue operating, delivering essential services in the first phase of lockdown, which in South Africa, as you know, we referred to as alert level 5, or the most stringent form of lockdown. That was really, really important. It took a huge amount of effort, tremendous amount of engagement between all the parties, and we were really well supported. And you can imagine the massive conflict and interest that needs to be addressed. On the one hand, we all were on board with doing everything possible to stop or minimize the spread of the virus because of its disastrous consequences for our population in terms of health, and what the damage could really be if we didn't get this right. And on the other hand, to make sure that we could fulfill our responsibility to keep servicing those critical essential service providers in South Africa and globally, that would allow societies to function. And with those channels and with those trusted relationships in place, we were able to achieve what many would have thought was probably not possible, and get that included in the regulations. We had the support from the Minister of the Department of Trade, Industry and Competition. We had to negotiate really hard with his colleagues in Department of Health, with the security ministries as well, to make sure that call centers could be included. The industry worked very closely together in developing protocols to manage safety, putting out guidelines for how we should operate, setting up networks to engage and communicate with each other, so that in this rapidly changing and evolving world, literally hourly so, we could be communicating with each other, we could be engaging upwards with our partners in government for guidance, for interpretation of regulations, and we could communicate through to the networks to share that understanding, and also to hear from them where their problems were, and move quickly to resolve them. So the whole industry, including the whole BPeSA team and all our partners, switched focus immediately into a very active and highly engaged COVID response team, if I can call it that, and it's paid dividends.
That's an interesting point you raised there, because once again, by observation, the role that BPeSA is playing, liaising with government, influencing the amendment of regulations, engaging with the security sector. My observation is it's on behalf of the entire industry, whether members or not. Is this correct? Absolutely.
BPeSA is, would love to have a growing membership base, because like all industry associations worldwide, they have jobs to perform, really important roles to fulfill, and need to be funded financially. We have funding from our partners, which is really tremendous, and but it's an important factor of any industry organization to be as financially self-sufficient as they can be. In fact, it's their responsibility. Otherwise, they will come and go and will not be able to be there to represent business effectively and credibly with partners in government and other social partners on a continuous basis. So, but having said that, the industry also has a key role to play in reaching out to the broader community involved in the sector, regardless of whether they're members, and that's what we did. So instantly, literally from day one, the support that was provided by the BPeSA team was for everybody who needed help, for everybody who wanted to participate in the processes that we put in place. Government and our partners in business also turned to industry associations to help. As you can imagine, trying to reach hundreds of thousands of businesses on a one-on-one basis is impossible, and so quickly. And to leverage the networks and the platforms that industry associations like ourselves have makes that process that much more efficient. And in an environment where things are happening real time, changes are occurring literally real time, it's so much more efficient to be able to work through those platforms. So we went from being, predominantly a member-focused, association in terms of our 2019-2020 growth plans, although always open to everybody to join in, to being just a broad-based resource to support call centers in South Africa being able to deliver their services and guiding them to comply with the requirements and regulations, so that we too could play our part in supporting government with the lockdown, with the combating of the COVID virus, and ensuring that these key responsibilities could continue to be fulfilled. So we ended up with, the majority of the organizations that we work with at the moment are not members. And that just goes to show the overwhelming level of engagement that and participation that we've had from business in this sector in a time of crisis like this. And I just have to take, you got to give them credit for the incredible way in which South African businesses, regardless of where they come from or who they are, how they just lobby together to make it work, and it's the same with our partners who we engage with in government. So it's been a fascinating experience, but it's open to everyone. South Africa is much bigger than BPeSA. We're very blessed to have the role that we play, but it has a much greater impact than just on our members.
Well, and yet, it's kudos to BPeSA and yourself and your team, because in my engagement with analysts all over the world, South Africa and the role of BPeSA in particular is being cited as a model that has handled this pandemic exceptionally well. There are a lot of lessons being shared elsewhere in the world. Which brings us now towards, nobody knows the crystal ball into the future, but as we progress through the COVID-19 pandemic and the consequences of that, and very difficult, but let's look into the future. And I think it's appropriate that we're chatting today after the announcement last night of the CXO global study on top 5 BPO destinations, with South Africa coming in for the 3rd year in a row into the 2nd favored spot. Could you comment on that, and then give us a view of where you and BPeSA see recovery and growth perhaps moving into the uncharted waters of the future?
Yeah, look, I think first of all, it was the most exciting news for us. The countries with whom we were competing for this particular position, if I can call it that, have been the leaders in this sector for so many years. We really learn from them, and we have the greatest respect for what they do. But it's exceptionally rewarding, I think, for all of those in South Africa to see South Africa retain that 2nd position for the 3rd year in a row, and to hear the shift, to see the shift in not just perceptions globally, but in practice, as more and more work flows from those large source markets into South Africa on the back of what's now understood to be a really, strong value-based proposition. So a really important, recognition for South Africa in terms of our overall strategy pre-COVID. But I think it also gives us a lot of confidence as we contemplate a post-COVID growth path, which will look different, but we at least go into that stage of this journey with this sort of strong footing. And we really are delighted, to have been given that recognition. So we've spent a lot of time over the past period looking ahead, one, understanding how best to help our organizations recover. They've sustained immense, losses in many cases, in spite of keeping going, as many industries across the country and across the world have done. But they've kept themselves going, and they've kept servicing those key clients that they've been able to service as from an essential service point of view, and we intend to build on that. And if we look at the global market, there's some significant changes. The most obvious change is the big BPOs will be reconsidering their geography strategies, making sure that they dilute their concentration risk, that they look at new geographies that are reliable, that they can switch work over to very, very quickly in a more agile way, countries that can scale up very, very quickly in a time of crisis like this, because maybe the nature of these impacts will differ, but we can expect in our future at some stage to have more disruption, perhaps not even dissimilar to what we're having now. So that's one key thing, and South Africa intends to respond to that by letting the world know from a location point of view that we are a reliable partner in a time of crisis. We can respond quickly. One, we can keep delivering core services required across the world. Two, we can respond quickly if countries need help and companies need to quickly relocate work. And three, that's all done in a state of crisis to the same service standards as it was before. So there's going to be a change. Work is going to move around the world. And there's going to be a keen focus on the location strategies. The second thing that's going to change, of course, is that we've been catapulted into the fourth industrial revolution, if I can put it like that, at a pace far quicker than perhaps many countries were actually proceeding, including ourselves. And it's a good thing, because we need to get there in any event. And what that's going to do is going to change a lot of the operating models to look at different ways of delivering work that we've now realized you should be able to do in any event, and you have to do in a time of crisis like this. So homework is a good example of that. It's not the only example of that, but of course homework is now really put to test the development of new subsectors and technologies like cybersecurity. And how robust is that, in fact, to enable entire workforces to deliver secure work from home? We're a long way from getting there, but we're going to have to get there. We're going to have to look smartly, and I think companies will around the world at their investment in infrastructure, because it's expensive, it keeps costs high. Organizations are going to look at outsourcing and the structure around that and the components of that quite differently, having learned now what's possible through the COVID environment. We also, of course, see countries are going to have to respond in different ways to address and claw back the economic gains that they've now lost. And that's playing itself out in many different ways. You've got vast levels of unemployment across the globe. Definitely that's going to force countries to look internally first and foremost to get employment going again, but it will come at a price. And again, where you have countries like South Africa able to play a role in partnering and supporting with the cost proposition that we have, combined with the quality of service, South African companies and South Africa as a destination offers international companies going through this rebuild an additional option to enable them to actually manage this commercially and fund their way back into growth with a very viable option. So we're looking at that too. So there are many of these things, Rod, that are changing in the world around us. New industries spawning out of the COVID crisis, different operating models, different approaches to the cost structures of the world we knew in BPO. And South Africa is aligning very, very quickly and preempting where a lot of those movements will take place.
And as tragic as it is, the realities of COVID-19, but I'm encouraged by your positivity, particularly going into the future. It looks like there's actually a lot of opportunities for South Africa going forward in terms of job creation, FDI, and so very encouraged by that. I'm sure you've got 101 fires to go and put out and keep the machine running. And if you could close with 2 or 3 bullet points of lessons, the things that top of mind as far as you're concerned that BPeSA and the industry has learned in the last 6 weeks. Anything specific which you'd like to share?
Rod, I think the first thing is the importance of those partnerships and relationships, and being able to figure things out together, work through things together, help each other together. You can't place a value on that. So I think that's the first thing that I would share as a key lesson. The second is the importance of being agile and adaptable. You have to be able to change course and respond to the unexpected very, very quickly. And both BPeSA and all our companies, I think, have done that exceptionally well in the COVID crisis. And the third thing, which is probably the most important thing, is that it is always all about the people. And as much as we've got our eye focused on so many other things as we try and navigate our way through crises such as this, it's the people who enable you to do that. It's the people who enable you to recover. It's the people who you're trying to take care of in a crisis like this. And wherever we are in our journey, it's going to be dependent on the character, the will, the participation of those people, young, talented people in South Africa, who are going to ensure that we get through this and move beyond and make it a great success. So those are the 3 key things I think are important to learn.
Excellent. And thank you very much for giving up valuable time this morning. I know you're really under a lot of pressure. And thanks for sharing these messages. And they're very positive with my take on it. So hopefully our viewers worldwide will get the message and help us rebuild an industry and move into the future. So, Searle, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Rod.